Welcome back to Ontario Cryptids, everyone. I'm excited to have you here for another episode filled with 4 incredible encounter stories that you won't want to miss. If you love hearing these fascinating accounts, be sure to hit the like button, the subscribe button, and hit the notification bell so you'll never miss another upload. And if you have an encounter story of your own, I'd love to hear about it. Send your stories to ontariocryptids@gmail.com and it might just be featured in a future episode. Now let's dive into these amazing stories. A few years ago, my sister and I were both home in our hometown in rural western Colorado due to the pandemic. We decided to go camping in Robidoux Canyon one night and we backpacked in several miles, so this was absolutely in the middle of nowhere. Nothing around at all, and not even a known place to hike or camp. We were sitting around a fire once it started getting dark and I started to feel really uneasy. We noticed that my dog was on high alert, his hair standing up on his back. Then we started to hear what sounded like a beeping noise periodically. It didn't sound like a human or an animal. Then we heard that sound like footsteps and twigs breaking coming towards us but stopping right at the edge of where the firelight reached. I'm not even sure if footsteps is the right way to describe it, kind of like something just rushing right to the edge of the light. It was really dark that night and nothing was visible beyond that. It happened again, so we immediately got into the tent together with my dog, too, who was acting really alert, listening and staying completely still with his hair still raised. He is a big shepherd chow mix and usually he will growl or bark or even chase when an animal or something is around, but this time he was just very still and listening. The beeping and rushing steps kept happening and I did not sleep at all that night. From all different directions, we were basically both frozen in terror. All I had was a small knife and I just clutched it and laying frozen. I had to pee so badly but absolutely could not leave the tent. As soon as daylight came, we got out of there as fast as possible without even saying a word. My heart is racing even recalling this night. I have no idea how to explain it. What are your thoughts on what we experienced that night? I'm a 23-year-old male living in rural Ireland. A bit of context before this happened. I'm not sure if they are linked, but I will mention it. Context. I have never had anything paranormal really happen to me until about 2 years ago where 2 separate things occurred. My friend and I were walking home at night when in front of us was an old man that looked just like he stopped dead in the middle of the road. We initially thought nothing of it, thought he may be drunk or something. But he didn't move as we were getting closer and closer. All of a sudden he turned around and it was like he had 2 bright yellow piercing eyes staring down at us. It could have been lights, but we were freaked out. We didn't move and just stared at him until he suddenly walked away. The whole thing occurred for about 5 minutes. Weird, right? 2. The same friend's dad picked me up one day from my house. He gave me a watch that he said he found on the side of the lake canal, usually where we'd go fishing. Ever since he gave me this watch, I feel like I can't get rid of goosebumps and I just feel like I get unlucky. My driving test got cancelled, close friends of mine fell ill, and a lot of other bad stuff, such as crashing my car, my friends crashing their cars, etc. This one is a bit far-reached, but just wanted to mention it anyways. I still have this watch and the ticking is so loud on it. Now the event. One night I was walking home around 10 p.m. when I suddenly heard what sounded like a door slamming shut. I thought nothing of it and continued walking. However, it happened again, but I heard 3 separate slams, as if it was 3 different doors banging shut at the exact same time. This started freaking me out, but I just continued walking the same pace. It was between 10:30 and 11 p.m., but what was weird is that there was no other cars or people in sight, which I've never seen around this time. When I got the next sound, I looked at the house and I saw it was a black dog. The dog had a metal bowl in its mouth and was banging it on the front doorstep. I started laughing, a bit of a relief laugh, but the dog turned and faced me. I've never seen a dog act like this. The dog stood up and just looked and wouldn't stop staring at me. Didn't make a sound either, just stared at me. Eventually I walked past the house, but I felt goosebumps like I never had before. Not sure if it's because I was scared, but I still have never seen or felt this feeling before, like something was behind me. I generally felt like I was in immense danger. Anyways, I went home after that and nothing strange has happened since. Also, this all happened outside of the same house mentioned with the dog and the old man. Thanks. In August of 2016, a friend and I went catfishing at night at a reservoir that bordered a state park in central Ohio. It was a very dark and particularly warm night, and we weren't having much luck catching anything. I think we both ended up falling asleep in our chairs. We were startled awake by the sounds of a deer screaming in the woods about 40 yards behind us. It went on for a short time, and then we heard something large quickly moving through the brush. It sounded much larger than a deer. We gathered our things as quickly as possible and started moving back to the car. The area the sounds came from was directly behind us and our car. The first thing I noticed was the smell. It was awful, something like a mix of mold, wet dog, and decaying flesh. There were also signs of a struggle, broken sapling, stirred up leaf litter, that sort of thing. We passed through as quickly as possible. When we got to the car and unlocked it, the headlights came on. We were parked parallel to the road. Just out of reach of the headlights, we could see a huge, dark, roughly humanoid shape move quickly across the road and stop in a ditch at the bottom of a steep hill. It looked in our direction and its eyes reflected a weird orangish yellow color. It didn't look like the eye shine of an animal I'm aware of. It disappeared into the trees and up the hill. We returned the next day for some gear we left behind in our haste and decided to recreate the road crossing to try and get a sense of the size of whatever we saw. My friend is 6'5" and the eyes seemed to be at least 6 inches higher than the top of his head. It might also be worth noting that the hill the animal climbed is steep enough that I couldn't efficiently climb it without using small trees to hold myself up. I don't necessarily believe that we encountered a Bigfoot that night. I don't really know that I think something like that could actually exist. However, I am very experienced in the outdoors, and that area and the speed, size, and the awful smell of whatever we saw that night aren't comparable to anything I've seen or experienced before or since. I need to write this down before I convince myself it didn't happen. This happened in December of last year. I was visiting my uncle in northern Minnesota, near the Canadian border. He's the kind of guy who prefers solitude. He lives in a cabin deep in the woods. No close neighbors, just trees and whatever lies in them. I never minded visiting. I liked the quiet. But after that night, I don't think I'll ever go back. It was the coldest night of the year, at least -30 Fahrenheit. My uncle had gone into town for supplies, so I was alone. The cabin was warm, the fire crackling, and I was scrolling on my phone when I heard it, something moving outside. Not footsteps, more like a dragging sound, slow, deliberate. At first, I thought it was the wind, but then came the knock. Not at the door, but at the window. 3 slow, deliberate taps. I froze. My uncle's nearest neighbors was a mile away, and no sane person would be out there in that cold. The knocking came again. I reached for my flashlight and shined it through the window. I wish I hadn't. There was something standing outside just beyond the tree line. It was tall, at least 7 or 8 feet, but emaciated with long, bony limbs. Its skin looked frostbitten, almost blackened, and its eyes were glowing, not reflecting light, glowing on their own, like embers buried in the dying fire. I should have looked away. I should have closed the curtains, but I was frozen, staring, unable to breathe, and then it smiled. Its teeth were too many, too sharp, stretching across its face. It opened its mouth wider than any human should, and then it spoke. "Let me in." The voice didn't match the body. It sounded wrong, like a recording played at a wrong speed. Too deep, too garbled. I ran. I grabbed my uncle's rifle, locked the door, and backed into the farthest corner of the room. The knocking stopped, but I could hear it scraping against the walls outside, slow, patient, like it had all the time in the world. I sat there for what seemed like hours, rifle shaking in my hands, until my uncle finally came back. The second his headlights swept across the trees, the noises stopped. He found me pale, sweating, and gripping the gun like my life depended on it. I told him everything. He didn't say a word, just nodded and checked around the cabin. When he came back, he looked unsettled. "There are no tracks in the snow," he said. "Nothing." That was impossible. I heard it, I saw it, but there was nothing outside. No footprints, no marks on the walls, just the untouched snow and the silent watching trees. I left the next morning and I haven't been back since. My uncle still lives there, but he told me something before I left. "If you ever hear it again," he said, "don't look. And whatever you do, never let it in." I haven't told anyone else until now, but I know what I saw, and I know it's still out there. Thank you all for listening until the end. I hope you found these 4 encounter stories a little creepy like I did, especially the last one. If you enjoy this content and want to support the channel, consider becoming a channel member for exclusive perks. Now, let's acknowledge the current OC members. I would like to thank Elizabeth, Jim, Diana, and Teresa for the contribution and support as members of the OC membership program. Your support is truly appreciated. And of course, don't forget to hit that like button, the subscribe button, and hit that notification bell so you'll never miss another episode. And if you have an encounter story that you want to share, I'd love to hear it. Send it to ontariocryptids@gmail.com. I would be honored to share your story with the OC community. Finally, I'm wishing you all a fantastic week ahead, and be sure to tune in next week for another thrilling episode on Ontario Cryptids.